I just want to say good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's National Transit Database webinar. We're just be going through some of the 2024 reporting system updates and clarifications. Okay, just a quick disclaimer before we get started. The contents of this presentation do not have the force and effect of law and are not meant to bind the public in any way. This presentation is intended only to provide clarity to the public regarding existing requirements under the law or agency policies. Okay, grantees and subgrantees should refer to FTA statutes and regulations for applicable National Transit Database requirements. Okay, real quick, the goal of this webinar is just to review some of the system changes to the NTD reporting system effective for report year 2024, including policy clarifications, requirements, and system updates. Today, we're going to start by reviewing the new policy clarifications that you'll find in our 2024 policy manual. Okay, these will include things like the hybrid rail definition update, peak levels of service for fixed route, GTFS zip file requirements, extra information on some of the B15 geospatial data for demand response questions, circumstances for data splitting across NTD reports, and then atypical and typical service for fixed route requirements, and finally seating capacity on your A30 form. We also have some system updates that we'll be going through. Okay, for instance, how to view previous year data within the annual report, a label change for age or disability on the B15 form, how to view mileage information from a previous year, how to recalculate average lifetime miles directly within the report, a notice for retired vehicles, the capital leasing field for the F40 form, a new GTFS section on the D10 form, and some friendly reminders such as the unique entity ID confirmation, as well as some tooltips. Okay, this is the contact information for the FTA IT Help Desk. If you have any technical questions, or you're running into errors or bugs within the system, you can go ahead and reach out to them. This is also the information for the NTD Help Desk. If you need any non-technical assistance, right? If you're going through your annual report and you have policy questions or just general NTD questions, and you for some reason can't get a hold of your NTD analyst, or even if you don't know how to get a hold of your NTD analyst, you can reach out to the NTD Help Desk and they'll be happy to help you. Okay, today I'm joined by Dan Barnes. He's a senior analyst for the NTD team. And then I'm Andrew Gogolin. I'm also a senior analyst for the NTD team as well. This is the contact information for the NTD program manager, Chelsea Champlin, as well as Tom Coleman, the previous NTD program manager, who is now the division chief of analysis at FTA's Office of Budget and Policy. Okay, so here are some relevant resource links that I really do encourage you guys to review. If you have a little bit of extra time, they can be very helpful. Okay, the first is the page with the Federal Register notice links, as well as some resource materials with tips and tools. We also have a new manual for monthly ridership and weekly reference reporting that you can find on our website on the NTD reporting manuals page, along with our reduced and full reporting policy manuals as well. I'd encourage you guys to review the NTD trainings and conference page to review any upcoming webinars just like this one, or courses held through NTI that may be more specific to your reporter type. Okay, these system updates and requirements that we're going to be talking about here, they're going to be covered in those trainings as well, but you also get some information that may be more tailored to your exact situation. Okay, and then lastly, we have an FAQ page for these new requirements and developments as well. Here are the deadlines for the report year 2024 based on your fiscal year end. This is the same as it's always been for previous years. Okay, agency with a June 30th fiscal year end date will have a due date of October 31st. September 30th fiscal year end dates have a due date of January 31st. And then agencies with a calendar year fiscal year end date should submit the reports no later than April 30th. Okay, the report year should launch the week of September 16th. And your analyst will send a welcome information email to you once those annual forms are available for your reporting groups. So especially if you're an October reporter, just keep an eye out. You should be receiving some communications from your analyst. Okay, so the first topic we're actually be covering is the new policy clarifications that you'll find in our manuals. And we're going to start with qualifying peak levels of service. So this one only really applies to commuter bus, motor bus, and bus rapid transit segments. And the definition for peak level of service, it remains the same, okay? It's a measure of how traffic moves on the roadway and is expressed in terms of traffic conditions. When it comes to determining peak levels of service, a qualified engineer has to do it and will determine that level of service using their best professional judgment, consistent with the definitions in the Highway Capacity Manual, a guide for multimodal mobility analysis, 7th edition. What's new in 2024 is that a traffic study may or may not be required, but whether or not that study is done is up to the discretion of the traffic engineer. Okay, also for fixed route, a clarification has been made regarding the requirements for GTFS files. So consistent with 2023, all links must be static, machine readable, not password protected, and the dataset may have multiple links, such as one per mode. In 2024, it's now specified that these links must provide a direct download to the GTFS dataset zip file. Okay, there's also going to be a way to confirm that these are all up to date within the annual report itself. So applicable NTD reporters, if you operate fixed route, you'll certify that your previously submitted web links are up to date on the D10 CEO certification form. Okay, shown are some resources that will help both the rural and urban transit agencies with these GTFS requirements, because you know they were new last year. Okay, the first is a link to the GTFS builder located on the RTEP website. And then directly underneath it is a link to their builder support tool as well. So they offer free live support on Thursdays from 1 p.m. to 1:30 p.m. Eastern if you need to speak to somebody directly. So if you tried these online tools, you tried the builder, you tried to use the builder support to help out, and it's just not working, you need someone to help talk you through it, they offer that live support on Thursdays as well. Okay, for hybrid rail, the policy manual definition has been brought into line with the definition listed in all our other NTD data products. The definition stated that hybrid rail typically operates light rail type vehicles as diesel multiple unit trains, or DMUs for short. The manual definition has now been updated to match the glossary, stating that these trains do not meet Federal Railroad Administration standards and must operate with temporal separation from freight rail traffic. Okay, so this change just updates or standardizes our definition for hybrid rail. No matter where you look, you're going to find the same definition. Okay, next we're going to move on to the B15 form, which covers geospatial data for demand response modes. Extra information has been provided to help with answering questions 8, 9, and 10 in particular, as they give agencies a lot of trouble in the past. And we'll go through each one of those questions and how to answer them as well. So first for question 8, it asks for each day of the week, what are your hours of operation? And is your service restricted to complementary paratransit eligible riders, restricted by age or disability, or open to the general population? So to answer, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to list your demand response services. This can include several different services that fall under the demand response umbrella. These are often branded differently. They can have different service hours, different service areas, but most importantly, they can have different eligibility requirements, and that's really what we're looking at here. So for each one of those services, you'll determine what those eligibility requirements are, and then you'll select yes for the category that fits. You should only report yes for multiple categories when you have separate services within the demand response mode that have different eligibility requirements. Okay, for instance, you'll select yes for complementary paratransit if you operate a service that is intended to meet the ADA complementary paratransit requirement for fixed route service, and which is restricted to persons your agency has found eligible for paratransit service. You'll select yes for age, disability, or low income if you operate service that is restricted to elderly, disabled, or low-income riders, but is not intended to meet the ADA complementary paratransit requirement for fixed route service. Okay, that but is really important because we can see a little bit of overlap when it comes to servicing elderly or the disabled. If that's part of your ADA service, then you won't select yes for age or disability. You'll just select yes for complementary paratransit. Okay, finally, you'll select yes for general population if you operate a service that has no eligibility restrictions and is completely open to the public. So keep in mind, you can select multiple categories if you operate multiple demand response services that have different eligibility restrictions. So if you have an ADA service and you do have a service that's open to the general public, you can select yes for paratransit and select yes for general population as well. Okay, question 9 asks what the minimum advanced reservation time for your service is, and then asks you to select your days or hours. So to answer question 9, you'll enter a single minimum reservation time, and then you'll select the days or hours option. If you require passengers to reserve their trip by a certain cutoff time the day before the trip, you should report 1 day. And then if you offer multiple services within the demand response mode and they have different reservation times, you should report whatever the shortest minimum advance reservation time is, right? Because you only have one box, you only have one entry for this question. So if you have multiple services, let's say you have one that has a 3-day requirement and then one that only has a 1-day requirement, your minimum reservation time would be 1 day. Question 10 asks what your fare is or what the fare you charge is. And this one can get a little bit tricky just because fares can really vary, not even just across different demand response services, but even within the same service, you can see different fares within that service. So if your agency has multiple services and the fares are varying, really what we're looking for is the most commonly charged passenger fare that you have. Okay, your common passenger fare, one that doesn't include any donations or special discounts. So for instance, if you have discounts for seniors, if you have discounts for students or multiple trip discounts, none of that's included. We're looking for your most commonly used base fare. Okay, so if needed, you can engage in some reporting assistance with the RTAP resources. You can consult with RTAP and use their tools to assist with training staff and complying with the new reporting requirements. And then as always, you can reach out to your analyst or the NTD help desk as well. Next, we have added a new example to the 2024 policy manual that further explains when splitting data across NTD reports is appropriate. So sometimes multiple agencies will collaborate to provide a service through a contract or another arrangement. In some cases, it can be appropriate to split that service among NTD reports. So for example, if you have 2 agencies, you have agency A and you have agency B, and they both operate service in overlapping service areas. If they have an agreement that agency A will operate Route 1 servicing both areas, and agency B will operate Route 2 that services both areas, then agency A can report Route 1 and agency B can report the data for Route 2. So while you can assign these routes, you can't split individual trips between NTD reports. So if a rider boards a service that is captured in agency A's report, then agency A has to capture that entire trip in their report. You can't split that ride across 2. And then finally, for demand response services, if both agency A and agency B's passengers are on the same vehicle at the same time, agencies cannot split that data between reports either. Instead, whoever is operating that service needs to capture that in their own report. Okay, next, a clarification has been made for atypical versus typical scheduled service. So full reporters must provide average daily data for a weekday schedule, a Saturday schedule, and a Sunday schedule within the annual report. And scheduled service is defined as the total service to be provided for picking up, transporting, and discharging passengers. But for fixed route in particular, this has been split up into typical and atypical. In 2024, that manual has been clarified to state that for fixed route modes, agencies are no longer required to distinguish between typical and atypical service days for scheduled services when you're reporting your average daily and your annual totals. Okay, so a little bit of a lighter load for you guys who operate your fixed route. You no longer have to distinguish between typical and atypical for those daily averages. Lastly, there's been an update to the specifications for reporting seating capacity on the A30 form. Sometimes these agencies will purchase a vehicle with a capacity that can be extended by adding more seats if necessary, so you can add and remove them. For instance, a vehicle may have an absolute maximum capacity of 15, but really only currently has 12 seats installed. So you'll think there's only 12 seats installed, its maximum capacity is 12. So in that case, what you're going to do is you're still going to report the absolute maximum of that vehicle, which in this case would be 15. This way, if you're adding and removing seats between years or even within the same report year, you don't have to update your A30 every time you do so. It's always just going to be that same maximum value of 15. Okay, so that'll wrap up our policy clarification section. And if you're having any trouble, if you have any questions at all, you can always feel free to reach out to your NTD analyst. And if you need help getting in contact with them, please reach out to the NTD help desk, like I mentioned before, and they'll be happy to help you get in touch with them. So for now, I'm just going to go ahead and I'll pass it over to Dan Barnes, and he's going to go through some of the 2024 system updates.
Thank you, Andrew. I will now go over some system updates you should be aware of when filling out your 2024 annual NTD report. Instead of digging through the form library to search for last year's forms, you will now notice an extremely helpful tool at the top of each individual form. A View Previous Year Data button now appears at the top of every form. When you click on this link, a new window will open and the approved version of the form you are in from the last fiscal year. You can place this side by side with the form you are still working on, which is useful if you see a validation check indicating a large difference between this year's and last year's data. Andrew spoke on question 8 of the geographic area coverage B15 form earlier, but you will now notice we have included low income to the age or disability option. The intent of this question is to capture services defined by age, disability, or low income. So we have included low income, which falls in line with the definition of public transportation. An example of low income based services would be Medicaid transportation, as long as that service meets the definition of public transit. Under the mileage information section of an existing RVI ID in the Revenue Vehicle Inventory A30 form, you will now see two new non-editable data fields titled Miles for Previous Year and Average Lifetime Miles for Previous Year. This update is only for applicable fleets where the fleet has the same number of active vehicles as the prior year. This will be helpful for reporters to reference the previous year's values when entering the current year's data. Another useful tool we have implemented is adding a recalculate button to the Revenue Vehicle Inventory A30 form for the reporting of average lifetime miles. This button is only available after a user has entered miles this year and allows users to recalculate the automated average lifetime miles field in the event the miles this year value had been changed. Please note that this button only appears for fleets with no number of vehicle changes since the prior year. Also, here on the A30 form, you will notice that a pop-up prompt will occur when user changes active vehicles to 0 to ask the user if they would like to retire the fleet. The retired radio button has now been moved to be more visible next to active vehicles. This should help users retire fleets seamlessly. On the operating expenses summary F40 form, you will now notice a capital leasing from B30's line. This is an auto-calculated field of the sum of capital leasing expenses from your contractual relationship B30 forms, where the reporter is the buyer of service. Please note that you still need to include this amount under the operating lease expenses 5220 line, along with any other operating lease expenses you may have. In the CEO Certification D10 form, you will now see an additional section titled General Transit Feed Specification. Here, CEO contacts will need to certify that the GTFS web links are up to date as of the time of certification. This may require coordination with whoever maintains the GTFS for your agency. This is required for all modes being operated when the 2024 report is initially submitted. In your agency profile P10 form, each agency is asked to enter their unique entity identifier, or UEID. The UEID is a number or other identifier used to identify a specific commercial, nonprofit, or government entity. This is now reported in place of a DUNS number for each unique transit agency reporting to the NTD. Each agency should have a unique entity identifier listed. If you do not have one listed and are unsure of where to find it, there is a link to the U.S. General Services Administration UEID webpage found in the policy manual. Please note that only the entity contact, CEO delegate, and CEO contact can update this information in the agency profile P10 form. Please contact your analyst if you have questions regarding the unique entity identifier. Finally, this is just a friendly reminder to use the tooltips. The tooltip icon is a white question mark inside of a blue circle. These can be found throughout the report package and have been created to help users better understand the data field in question. When you hover your cursor over the tooltip icon, a detailed description of that data point will appear. Thank you everyone for taking time out of your busy day to better prepare for the upcoming reporting period. If you have any questions, please unmute yourself and ask away, or feel free to ask in the Q&A box. If you don't have any questions, have a wonderful day, and we look forward to another successful year of NTD reporting.